All right. So you guys can see my screen all right. My name is Rosa, and I will be presenting a bit today on the process of developing the scenario worlds for global governance that we went through in the Trigger project. It's an EU-funded project, and so the process and then the scenarios themselves. And like we just said, if we get a chance, we will play through a prototype kind of game version of one of the scenarios to see what works and what doesn't. So a bit about myself. I am from the Manoa School, as it's casually, cultishly known. I went to school and studied under James Dater at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and got to participate in some really excellent projects there, including working with Stuart Candy and Jake Dunnigan on experiential futures for the Hawaii 2050 project. And so that was very formative in shaping my approach to future studies and the development of alternative futures, and particularly, again, ways of making futures more accessible, engaging, and communicable through multiple media. So I won't say that we've been completely successful yet at that in the Trigger project, but we are working on it. Since 2016, I've been working at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research in Karlsruhe, Germany. I've mainly been working on EU projects because my German is not quite that good yet. But we do also some like private sector work as well. But I try to take everything I learned in the Manoa School with respect to, what are alternatives really useful for and what constitutes a solid set of scenarios and alternative futures research into my work here at Fraunhofer. A bit about the Trigger project itself. So Trigger stands for Trends in Global Governance and Europe's Role. And really that the acronym itself and what it stands for represents fairly accurately what the Trigger project does. I promise you that most of the texts are not, most of the slides are not this text heavy. And I'll let everybody onto the MIRO board when we get closer to the gameplay, if you want to take a closer look at this. But the Foresight was really just one component of the Trigger project. There is also the aggregator, which you can see here, which is a very useful database developed with the European Union, University Institute, EUI, based on the Global Stat project. So that's a very interesting project going on, looking at kind of a data analysis of policy and actorness, as we are calling the activities of the EU and what they can do in terms of global governance, in terms of internal governance, how multi-layered governance kind of works. That constitutes a whole other kind of branch of research into which Foresight played a role. The Cocteau platform is also being developed in a different mode of more social game approach to exploring different scenarios. And that's still being kind of developed and tested in terms of how to integrate scenario exploration with an online platform, but it's making some good progress. And then the Perseus branch of the Trigger project is supposed to be mainly for policymakers to engage with the results of the larger Trigger project in terms of looking at alternative future developments, kind of the trends that are being tracked and how dynamic they might be, and building a platform so that they can inform their work in terms of developing more anticipatory policy. So Trigger is really this fascinating project that I've been honored to be a part of and to help in my small way through the Foresight. The Foresight started out with about a year's worth of research, right? So that was how we started our scenario development process and our Foresight process. We looked at around 1,000 pieces, sources of information, reports regarding future trends, both macro scale and then more topic specific. And then as we got closer to the workshop itself, we organized all of that into a report that I wouldn't say siloed, but maybe that is the best word. It tried to categorize all of these trends and factors that we were tracking along the STEEP plus framework. So that's social trends and factors, technological, ecological, economic, political, and then plus, which we just kind of set as something that didn't fit cleanly into any one of these, or not as cleanly as maybe we would have liked. So the additional. Uh, Once we had this research kind of assembled, we took it to a workshop. And before I start the next slides, if there's ever any questions, I'm not great at looking. I will do my best to look for the little hand icons. But if you just turn on your mic and say, I have a question, that's absolutely fine. No offense taken. Please interrupt me if you want to ask any questions about anything you hear here. Okay, so we have this factor report. And we took those factors into the first workshop. So here they are. The first thing we asked people to do was we had about 30 participants, and the participant range was some pretty high-level experts, and then some students from the EUI and from a couple of other schools that had been brought through our consortium. Who are mainly interested in global governance or some aspect thereof as their topic of interest of studies. So we had a relatively diverse group of participants in this workshop. Now it was, again, still limited to about 30 people, but what we asked them to do was take a look at all the factors that were assembled, and for each of the categories, prioritize a top 5. And then we said, okay, now we're going to break into small groups, take these 5 topics and address them, and try to build out their possibility space in something we call the tetralemma process, which I'll get to in just a second. And then we started developing the scenario cores. So the tetralemma process is something that we've been using for about 1.5 years, 2 years. We're still in the process of writing a paper about it. Takes some time, given everything. But it sort of works like this. You take a factor and you say, okay, here's the factor. And then you start to really outline in this cognitive framework, well, what are all the different possibilities that we think, how could this evolve over the next time frame, 30 years in this case. And it really helps generate these imaginative conversations, right? So we let everybody kind of discuss at first, like, what is the group's current idea of like how this factor will develop. And then we challenge them and say, okay, can you just think of something that's within the realm of possibility, but is distinctly different from what is expected. And so then we kind of carve out those 2 spaces. Then we start kind of, doing a mashup. Like, okay, well, what if we get a little bit of A and a little bit of B? And that kind of carves out this idea for hybrid possibilities. And then we have these 2 other areas. D is there anything external or a paradigm shift in our thinking that could actually take this factor and not nullify it, but change it to the point where we're not having the same conversation about this factor anymore. And that's really where people's kind of thinking in terms of systems, in terms of kind of the externalities that are impacting this factor, that's where it really starts to broaden out. The E factor down here, yeah, so I lovingly call Sci-Fi Alley. That's when sometimes people who haven't engaged in futures work before are like, yeah, what if aliens come down, or what about a giant asteroid, et cetera, et cetera. The apocalypse is nigh. Those ideas don't get dismissed, but they get kind of pushed into, okay, this is a black swan type space. Yeah, maybe it's a possibility. We don't really know, but we don't want it to be the focus of the conversation. So
Aaron, can I ask you a question about this?
yeah, please, definitely. definitely.
So the shifted paradigm one,
Yep.
how much time do you spend, or can you tell me a little bit about, or us, I should say, a little bit about the challenges that you encounter trying to sort of help people to understand and to think about things from a shifted paradigm perspective like that? I mean, I understand that mapping out the sort of more familiar possibility space with these A, B, and C options helps to frame what the paradigm is, and then it makes it easier to go to D. But can you tell us a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting?
Yeah, yeah, I will do my best, and you're right to point out that this is really like the more challenging aspect of this process is getting people towards that space, and really getting them to think through like, okay, how can we rethink the paradigm of approach that we're currently using? But it also is the most fruitful. So how much time when we spend on this, it really depends on how much time we have in the workshop. And this is something that, our current kind of uh, workshop paradigm where it's all online and everybody wants more foresight in less time, has really challenged. I would say like a good conversation time for one factor in the tetralemma is 20 to 30 minutes, somewhere in there. People warm up to the factor, they kind of get out where they already, any biases that they might already have in terms of, well, no, this is the way it is. And then they hear for the first time, nope, nope, actually, it's not that way. And then these discussions start happening. It's as those discussions continue to develop that you're able to really get a picture of, okay, how is the frame of this factor or this trend right now? And then you have to kind of push people out. So how else might we think about this? What are some other opportunities, or challenges or externalities that might shift this? I
Yeah, and
actually,
yeah.
well, I have an example
Okay,
of
good. Yeah.
one that I think is helpful. So like space junk, right? This is a factor for certain futures. Um, and kind of like the current projected is that uh, assumption is that this will just kind of continue to accumulate. Um, the distinctive divergence would be that there is all of a sudden a global agreement that we have to treat space junk, we have to clean it up as soon as possible and make our space um, clean again. Within C, then we have, okay, well, maybe just some nations start cleaning up efforts, or maybe there's private companies that address this. And then to maybe shape like, well, what if we, instead of seeing space junk as junk, we say, no, no, actually, this is a valuable resource. We need to be reutilizing these things. We've already spent the time, energy, and resources to put it in space. Now that it's there, maybe we can do something with it. And so that would be, I think, an example of shifting the paradigm about thinking about a factor. How, does does that sort of make sense about how the paradigm shift works?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've been using this for a couple of years for with mostly success because it does create a safe place for conversation where everybody can be heard, and through the dialogue you can kind of shape, okay, well, what is this fact, how do people in the group think about this factor, how else might we think about this factor? But it's not set in stone, and so yeah, anyway, so we used this technique in the 6 small groups that we had assembled to take the prioritized factors and have them run through as many of those 5 priority factors that they could. Um, Given time, I think some groups didn't make it through all 5, but actually that was not a huge problem. What we did from then is introduce like, okay, so here's our scenario space. We needed a way to take this, what was quickly becoming this balloon of information. Yeah, we have 100 factors. Okay, now we've only got 30, but now each of those 30 factors has some number of derived possibilities, 3, 4, 5, sometimes more. What we asked the small groups to do then was, okay, take the possibilities from the factors that you've already developed and place them on this board. So we have the biaxial kind of matrix here of what happens if we have global governance in 2050 that is fragmented, a continuation of the present, or transformed. And we let them kind of have their own definition of what that meant, right? As they placed these factors in the different spaces. And then also, so above and below, we have there is a set of scenarios where the EU plays a stronger role in global governance and has more influence there, and then a set of scenarios where it has a weaker role in global governance. So altogether, we started with 6 scenario spaces where they could take their factors and place them. And then what they would end up doing then is all those different boards from those 6 groups were brought together. This is like day 2, the first part of day 2. And we said, okay, so all of the factor trajectories that were developed in the tetralemma that lived in a fragmented, weaker EU or a continued weaker EU or a stronger transformation EU, they've all been placed now in this space. So we have these elements. It says, here's the factor, maybe it's population growth, maybe it's some aspect of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, or global health. And we said, here is one of the trajectories that fell into this space. And well, here are all the trajectories that fell into this space. How can we start to generate a narrative around these? And so that's what each of the small groups worked on for the second part of the second day, was saying, okay, let's make some connections here and define them in terms of, here's the factor, here's one of the trajectories we outlined, and we'll put those together and we'll say, here's an element of the story you want to tell about this world we're building. So that was the end of the first workshop, and we ended up with, again, 6 kind of scenario cores. What happened though was, let's see, that was the end of November 2019, around the same time that the news just started to mention COVID-19 in China, and it was not a big deal at the time. I mean, it was a big deal, but mostly is contained to China. And so we had a second workshop planned for January. Sorry, no, it was March. And pretty much the same time that workshop was to take place, the EU closed its borders for the first time. We had organized it along with the CEPS Ideas Lab in Brussels, and literally a week before, we're in a project review meeting for Trigger, and everybody is like leaving, not running from the meeting, but saying, I think we're done here. We all should get on our trains, and hopefully we'll get out of this nation and home before the border closures become more serious. And within a couple of days, every nation pretty much closed down. So in response to this, as I'm sure many of you know, this global crisis of not an unprecedented nature, but certainly for our generations, it's a first-time event. It really started this conversation of like, okay, is this now the new normal, the recognition of the post-normal? Regardless of how you want to kind of frame that, the consensus was that we should eliminate the continuation space for global governance and merge elements of those scenario cores with the other 2. And so we eventually ended up with 4 scenarios. I think time will tell whether or not that was the one we should have eliminated, or if we should have eliminated it all. But that was the decision at the time. So we ended up with 4 scenarios. And down here, I'll share the MIRO board link in just a minute. Down here, there's a link to the deliverable of those 4 final scenarios. They went through another almost 10 months of revision, of review, of changing things, a whole digital workshop series on how to kind of yeah, make them more coherent, make them tell better stories, make the worlds that they're depicting a little more cohesive. I wouldn't necessarily say plausible. Well, yeah, make them more plausible in terms of if something more ridiculous is introduced, it's grounded in a way that is that is plausible, so that it seems less ridiculous, I would say. Are there any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to start. I'll tell you more about each of these scenario worlds and we can go from there. But are there any questions on the process? No? All right. All right. In that case, I'll go to the first one. Oh yeah, sorry. This is all the consortium from the Trigger Project. A lot of great academic institutions and research institutions. And it's been a pleasure working with all of them as well. So let me take this opportunity actually to send you all the link so you can follow along. I assume that most of you are, where's my chat function? Are familiar with MIRO Board. If not, you can just follow along with my screen and hopefully that will be enough to help you navigate around. So the diplomacy world, Duplo was kind of taken on as the physical metaphor for how does this world work.
Aaron,
Yeah.
Can you open the Miro permissions, because we can't access it right now?
Oh no, I absolutely can. I think. Where is my? Where are they? Let me stop sharing real quick because I think the sharing might be stopping the menu options from appearing.
Sure.
Or not. That's really weird. Sorry, I thought I had already opened those permissions. My apologies.
No worries.
Yep. Okay, let's try that again then. Sorry about that, guys. Here is a link to the board. And yeah, feel free to roam about the cabin, as they say. And I will get back to diplomacy. And I'll also say, so within, there's some elements that I'll show on screen in terms of what I'd like to highlight about the different scenarios. But then also there is the executive summary for these scenarios is below if you want to read through kind of the synopsis of what's happening in each of the scenario worlds. And then within the deliverable, there's an extended text where we really go into more detail in terms of how do the different parts of this world work together, what's influencing one another, as well as there were deep dives in a different work package regarding 3 specific technologies. So artificial intelligence, open source software, and distributed ledger technologies, blockchains. So those were the 3 technologies in focus in a different work package that we did our best to incorporate, as well as information regarding the actorness of each of different layers of EU governance. So all that's kind of built into the scenarios at the end. This is really just the brief overview of each of these worlds. But the hope was that we can tie it into the whole project and really make a resource for people who are thinking about or looking to utilize, I should say, long-term future scenarios that take into account a lot of different moving pieces, and some of them with deeper dives in terms of in terms of the content, so EU actorness, different technologies. Yeah, we did our best. So Yeah, any more questions, please feel free to ask. Diplomacy was built in the idea of Duplo as in Lego, right? So there's very big blocks that define governance of this world. We even drew a little map of it and how it might work. So these are the four kind of blocks of governance. They're very insular. There's not a lot of multilateralism across these blocks. But within each of these, they have very strong kind of governing institutions and partnerships to take care of things like security and writing policy regarding technologies. Each of them has a very different technological approach, resource management, and yeah, one of the things that doesn't work out so well is climate change, because there isn't this kind of concerted global effort. You have a lot of piecemeal, like one block says we're going to do this and they do, and it's effective, but it has longer, it has consequences in other places that aren't accounted for. But because of this kind of non-cooperation between the blocks, becomes a very that continues to be a very pressing issue on this world. Biodiversity is a major concern. Yeah, let's see. The EU, as the map will show, and as is outlined in the story, has really consolidated, or I would say maybe better, reached very mutual beneficial partnerships with much of North and Eastern Africa, and then what is currently kind of known as like Eastern Europe. It's really fostered strong partnerships and a security zone with its neighboring countries. That was its kind of approach to survival and response to some of the things that were happening in other blocks, with particularly in response to actually the global pandemic. So that's written more in the story as one of the flashpoints for how some of this comes about. But these points here on the screen really kind of paint a picture of, well, what's happening in the world of 2050. Questions? No. All right. Don't need to revisit all of those slides. So the transformed global governance, and in which the EU plays a strong role, was titled the Reunited Nations. And really the main aspect of this is that the United Nations itself has been transformed institutionally. So the rules and the bodies of the UN have undergone some pretty strong redesign and reform. And leading the charge there was the EU, along with a number of countries around the world, maybe not the bigger, more powerful countries in the current UN, but some of the smaller developing nations that had felt ostracized from the present UN, right? And so they kind of build up this very large consortium and demand that the United Nations be reformed. And in so doing, they redefine how global governance works. And again, you've got some of these technological positions or policies regarding how artificial intelligence is to be managed, data privacy issues, and there was this reaffirmation of EU values, which I'm happy to say somebody brought up even in one of the earlier workshops, like, this sounds a little too close to neocolonialism. And so we said that's true. So we need to approach how it is that the EU values get incorporated into this. What is it about them? Can we redefine? Are they EU values, or are they values that are widely held across different societies for different reasons and not necessarily EU centric? Yeah, in this scenario, there's a very top-down approach to ecological, environmental protection and governance, and it's all done through the United Nations, right? The United Nations has become a very powerful actor. It's no longer, yeah, what it is today, right? It has not only this the ability to make strong policy, but also to enforce strong policy in and of itself. So that pretty much sums up, I would say, Reunited Nations. The more darker dystopian future is called worldwide gaps. This scenario is, I would say, relatively defined by power actors in terms of nation states. The US and China were kind of set up as these two poles of the global power system who, in their own way, continue to support and back up private entities who also have a large presence in terms of activities, global activities, right? So there's a lot more power struggles here, and what you see is very different across the spectrum of inequality. Everything gets worse. But what we did in this scenario is we did our best to say, okay, where are the positives? Because dystopias aren't necessarily useful, nor are they necessarily accurate, right? Everybody does their best, regardless of the conditions. So what else is emerging in this space that's defined by more polarized power oppositions? What's happening with these people who are feeling, left behind or on the bottom scale of these wealth inequalities? What are they doing in terms of resistance and survival and reorganization and community building? And one of the really interesting things I thought in this scenario was that even though urbanization continues to define a lot of how people move for opportunities and where they're located geospatially, what urbanization combines with is this very strong kind of return to culture. So what develops is really these enclaves or communities, like self-sufficient communities inside of cities that kind of evolve around a certain culture. And it can be a type of religious or cosmology, but these cultural enclaves emerge and then they network. Somebody said I didn't like this future. Are you talking about this future? Yeah. Many people didn't like this future, but I would say that there are some very nice kind of aspects to take into account, because maybe not nice, but interesting. These cultural enclaves actually become the power response to both the private kind of sector actors, and then also to these two, global monolithic powers in terms of saying, well, how can the cities respond, and how can networked cities that are utilizing culture as this basis for exercising consumer kind of power, really writing internal policies that say, well, we're not going to buy this, and we're going to channel our collective resources towards this. How does that play a role in balancing out these larger powers? So despite it looking a little more dystopic, I think that there are really some interesting things going on in this scenario as well. Okay. Okay. Any questions on those three scenarios? Nay, no. Any comments, I should say, also, like, yeah. All right. All right. So in that case, let's try this prototype game and see if it works. Over here to the left, you'll see the game per se. Hopefully all the elements that are supposed to be locked down are locked down. And what, so This was developed, again, based on the scenario exploration system that is in use by the JRC. And it attempts to take that kind of system and some of the mechanics therein and build out a game, a playable version of a scenario. So really leaned heavily on this, on the explorative kind of aspect of the title and also of the gameplay before, but instead of doing it in a time-based fashion, so 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I designed this version to be more time travel based, right? So all the players will just be in 2050, but they don't know anything about it. The first thing to do would be to choose a role. There are 5 roles that I've outlined, and I'm actually, again, looking forward to feedback on this to see what works and what doesn't. The 5 roles are an EU agency, an EU member state, civil society organization, an external nation that is external to the EU, and then a private actor. So there's only 5 roles, and we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 people, 11 people, 11 participants. Can I give you guys the freedom to pair up and choose a role to co-play, or yeah. Okay, now there's only 10 people. That makes it so much easier. Okay, 2 people per role, no problem. Unless, Sarah, unless you want to play, in which case, no. Okay, sorry, we're back to 11. Okay, some people have to leave soon and some people can't get into MIRO. For those people that can't get into MIRO, here's the link. And if the rest of you could choose a role, go ahead and think about who you want to play. I see at least 1 or 2 people have started. So a civil society organization is being edited. We can have more than 1 player in each role, or you can work as teams. This is so much easier when people are like live around a table using real cards, but we'll see how this works. Once you've chosen your role and you've put in some details about yourselves, so if you're going to be a civil society organization or an external nation, just write which one and how you're imagining being something, one of these actors. It could be pretty abstract, right? And I would say at this point, global governance is this kind of interesting, flexible term, and the scenarios are these massive worlds. Like, they don't take everything into account, but they definitely work at a level that is macro scale. So if you write down, for instance, that for a civil society organization, you are Greenpeace, then you're all of Greenpeace, which I know is a radical simplification of that organization and how it operates in different places. But go ahead and be that that entire organization, and with that, say, take on all the powers that you imagine it to have. This includes if you're an external nation and you want to say, well, I'm going to play Nigeria or China or India, Brazil. You're all of Brazil, and that comes with it lots of responsibilities, but then also lots of opportunities to act. So around each of these, and you'll definitely run into the limits of my imagination, there are some base actions for each of these actors. I don't see these as exclusive to any of the actors, and I definitely do not see these as the limits of their actions. They were just a few that I typed in. Hopefully they make sense as a starting place for your own thinking. There's also a blank card in each of these actor areas to say, to create your own. But we'll get to that in a minute. once you've chosen your actor, go over to the other side of the board and write here a bit about what your vision is for that actor in 2050. So use your imagination a bit and say, well, in 2050, not knowing anything about this particular scenario, I think that this organization would be doing X, Y, and Z. So I'll give everybody about 5 minutes, or yeah, to do those two things. Choose an actor, write a few details about how you intend, who you intend to be, and then write a vision about how you see that actor in 30 years. Sorry, 29 years. Want to be accurate. If you guys have any questions or comments, again, feel free anytime. Oh, what's that? Yay. Sarah, I have to ask, is the recording also recording the screen? Maybe, possibly.
No, so the recording only records what happens on Zoom.
Okay.
So yeah, because otherwise it would be very messy. That was something that I was worried about in previous webinars as well. And at some point I realized it actually just records your screen right now and your face. So don't worry about that.
That's good. Yeah, I was really like, oh, somebody put a really nice, uplifting, cool icon in here. I wonder what other things they could put in there, but it doesn't matter for posterity's sake. And as far as YouTube is concerned, yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Good. Let me just check in real quick and see what people are writing here. Okay, you can take the lead. All right. So Natalia and Just you guys are, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name. I'm sorry.
I'm used to it. I'm used to it. It's Joost. Yeah, it's
Joost. It's Joost.
That's right.
Thank you. I will do my best. Now at least I have it in my brain, and every time I see it.
Yeah, Natalia, which can you pick a private sector actor you want to be? I'll just watch and I'll help.
Awesome. Oh, Joost, it might help if you click off the text box there, because otherwise she won't be able to edit it. Yep. Okay. Okay. Excellent. I was thinking like maybe I should write an entire list of the EU agencies and all the different derivations of EU agencies. And I was like, no. We'll let people, if they know one that they want to be, then they can just be that one. And if they want to create their own, also fine. 30 years is a very long time. It's older than most of the actual present day EU agencies, so no problem. Don't forget to write your vision again, like what is it that your agency or your nation or your organization, company, how do you see it in 30 years? Okay, good. We've got one there. Okay, I'm going to. Can I ask the person who is playing the EU agency to write just a short vision of what the social liberal believing in techno fixes, instrumentally using expertise. How do you think your agency is working in this particular future? What is it doing? What type of expertise is it tapping into, and how is it maybe using it instrumentally? Are you addressing a particular issue or topic, or yeah, or techno fixes in general? That's the topic. I don't know. Just a few details again. What you imagine will be a pressing issue in 2050. And let me check in here.
Sorry,
Okay.
that's me, the EU agency, but I'm frozen somehow. I cannot move, so I was just checking with my computer.
Okay. If you want, you can tell me what you would write there in the vision, and I can type it in for you. Or maybe refresh your screen for the freezing thing. Okay. It's up to you, Olivia, and yeah, let me know. So at least one person here. Okay. Awesome. Let's see. So is anybody familiar with the scenario exploration system? Has anybody here played it before? In one of its many iterations? Maybe not. Or probably definitely not. It's a cool little system that's been designed to help people learn about scenarios and how the world could come into being. But it really relies on a game master. And what I was trying to do with this design is remove that reliance, right? So instead of having the game master kind of tell the story of the world as it evolves, what I've done is taken all of the different more detailed bullet points from the scenario and set them up in a grid below. And how I was envisioning gameplay to go was we'd all start out in round one. Each of the actors would choose a card. So we'll just go from top to bottom. So the EU agency can choose a card first. They can choose from any of these categories. So there are the social, technological, ecological, political, economic, and additional categories. And there are some statements about the different evolutions in those. And I would say each actor chooses one of these aspects of 2050 and then places it on the board in round one. Once we have 5 or 6 of these cards on the board, we can read them together and collectively come up with, okay, here's our new evolved image of 2050. And then we would use an action card from our particular role and say, now that we have some more information about the scenario, how do we respond, right? Has it changed our vision? And if so, how do we respond in terms of an action? What might we do to engage this scenario? What might our strategy be? So in this case, I will start by choosing one of these cards. I will choose this one and I'll move it up here. Oh, yep, got to bring it to the front, and I'll bring all of them to the front in a second. But then I'll read it out loud so everybody can hear it. So it's technological, and this says that in this world of Gaia, genetic engineering has created new sources of energy, carbon capture capacity, and robust food supplies. So genetic engineering has really been embraced. But the field has also seen numerous scandals perpetrated by rogue research initiatives and has threatened entire actor networks and ecological systems. So I don't know at this point what is these actor networks. I understand genetic engineering maybe a bit, but why would it need to be a rogue research initiative? And that would just be my thinking about here's a card that I've grabbed, and here's me relaying the information to the group. Would somebody else like to grab one of the cards from any of the categories, preferably not technological since we already have one of those, but from the other categories, and place it on the board in round one and just read it out loud to everybody. And also read it out loud and think through it a bit. Who wants to go first? Guest muralist, guest maker, guest explorer, or Saurabh. Did I say your name mildly okay? Since yours the only name that's on there, maybe you want to start? Oh, he's gone. She's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I'm working out of my phone, so it's having
Okay.
a little bit of difficulty.
Oh my God. Yes.
Just give me a minute.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for trying to work on your phone in Miro. Thank you.
I guess I'll go for a social change.
Okay.
And
is there one that drew your attention? Yeah, I was gonna say I can click and drag it up there for you.
all right.
Yeah, urbanization.
Yep. That.
Okay. I'll click and drag it up there. Can you still see it?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay.
But it's still on the back. You need to bring it on the front.
Yep. Sorry. Bring to front. And I will grab all of them and bring it to front. Okay, so I'll let you kind of read it out loud. If you can still see it clearly, then I will change the screen share and I'll drop out for a second. Okay.
Urbanization has plateaued or even reversed in many areas as various incentives to create smaller, specialized communities have encouraged population distribution.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why that one appealed to you, or something interesting about that you would like to make sure everybody knows about your own thinking and approach to that piece of this puzzle, or this scenario puzzle?
Yep. I think the general wisdom out there on urbanization, at least, so I'm joining from India, and the dominant narrative over here is that urbanization, we're just going to see more and more of urbanization. So if a scenario I'm imagining, so this idea that the urbanization has plateaued or even reversed, it's kind of interesting. It's good to explore this because I think there is a general trend out there to just assume that the urbanization is going to be a one-way process. Especially since COVID-19, we have seen some really different takes on that. So we've seen all sorts of migration, whether it's rural to rural, rural to urban, and now a lot of urban to rural as well. So considering what the 2050 scenario is going to look like, there's every chance that urbanization, there might be a reversal in urbanization. So I was kind of fascinated by that.
Great.
I'm not so sure about, though, I'm a little confused. Is the round one only regarding, are we only discussing the Gaia scenario here?
Yes. So all of these bits of information, it's all just Gaia. And so the idea here would be what's happening in the Gaia world. And the gameplay is, again, to create a kind of mechanic where people are building this world together based on the little bits of information they have. So they don't have the whole picture yet, but by the end of the gameplay, they would have a more holistic image of how the world works, what might be, driving certain aspects of the world, and then also how they, as their assumed role, would have some agency there. What types of agency might they have acquired? What might they have given up in terms of societal power or actorness? So yes, the idea here is this would all be Gaia. All of the cards below are from Gaia, and we would be slowly kind of building out our understanding of this larger world together. Yeah. I did also wanted to mention, I think this urbanization one is really interesting because it also shows a bit about how that tetralemma process would have worked. absolutely urbanization is seen as kind of a one-way trend. So we challenged everybody and said, well, you know, can we say what's the opposite of that for B? Like, okay, urbanization plateaus or it even reduces. And everybody kind of says, okay, yeah, I guess, you know, we can say that in November. And then, like you said, I wouldn't call it de-urbanization, but really like people saying, questioning whether or not they want to live in the city as of COVID-19. Yost, thank you very much for attending. Oh, he's already gone. Very good. Anyway, this is one of those instances where something that was seen as not so likely earlier in the process all of a sudden gets justified in reality a little bit. But it has become a core component of this world, at least. So something to think through. Well, what are really the ramifications of that move towards, if not de-urbanization, at least urban city centers haven't continued to grow the way that we would have assumed in 2018.
Right.
Would somebody else like to play a card? I definitely don't think that we're going to get through all of the game, but we can at least play through and learn a bit more about the Gaia scenario as we like. And
yeah, I have a question.
Yes. Sarah, yeah.
Sorry. Just because I'm trying to understand, like, is there something we should consider when choosing a card? Like, should we maybe build like the conditions in the first round or something, like it makes sense together? Or is the idea to just put in very random cards and just discuss what that would mean, just to understand the process a bit? And then where does your role come into play, basically?
Good questions. So again, in the design of this, it's supposed to be much more, all of these cards are snapshots of parts of 2050. So there's not really a causal chain or a time influence. It's more like this is happening in the Gaia world of 2050. So you can select a card based on something that sounds interesting to you and something that you would really like to introduce right away. I also think that this would work really good in a more randomized way. So if all the cards were hidden and you kind of selected one at a time and said, okay, I want to play an ecological card. I don't know what it is. Okay, here it is. I'm going to read it to the group. Part of this is, again, that medium. What does this allow for and what does it not? The second part, how do the actors interact? So round one would go, we get everybody has a chance to place a card and tell one part of this world and start building a more holistic sense of, from based on what we know, okay, now we would choose as an actor something that we would do. And I have to say that at this point, there are different ways that you could frame this. You could say, okay, I like aspects of this future, so I'm going to play my role in the present and move and take an action, a strategic action in 2020 that would move towards what I know of 2050 so far. And I think that's probably the more useful kind of way to approach this game. But you could also do something like, okay, well, I'm learning more about my role in this future from what I understand. So as an actor in 2050, I would do this, I think, right? I imagine that I would be acting in such and such a way or fashion. And then what you would learn through that is, as the scenario becomes more clear and more elements are exposed, how you'd actually, it'd be more of a self-learning process. Like, well, I perceive a private actor or a nation state to act more like this. And at the end of the scenario, I see that this, and this has happened in terms of power. And so it would be more of a testing of maybe not necessarily bias, but like what you're preconditioned to think about whatever role you assume and how it might be questioned based on the scenario and how you might respond based on what you learn. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
Definitely. Would anybody else like to present a piece of this world in 2050? I see Natalia I see you on the board and in the space.
I can place a card.
Sure, thanks. Are you the guest maker? Yes, you are. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I am.
Just a usability question. Are you using a tablet or a touch, a touchpad?
A touchpad.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to read out the card.
Yes, please. And
I
I'll
chose
zoom in.
ecological, partly also because of the role that I'm having as a nature conservation organization. So I think it's important to also look at these developments in the ecological. So it says an increasing number of ecosystems have been granted globally recognized civil rights that can be used to legally protect them for current and future generations.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's so far kind of in line as well with what Louise and I wrote down as the future for the IUCN, in the sense that we thought that, well, yeah, I mean, what I thought would maybe make sense or is already a trend is that there is this huge push for sparing nature, right? So that you have nature which is used for human purposes, and then you have nature which is just there for nature and should be protected and spared. And I think that with this card, you would open this up way more though, because then if you consider any kind of ecosystem to have the right to be basically protected legally, then I think that really opens up what you are protecting, including also agricultural ecosystems and other ecosystems that are actually used for human purposes. So yeah, interesting to think about how that would change maybe also the approach of different organizations, nature conservation. Yeah.
Cool. And I see that Louisa has said, yes, definitely. And I think that's in terms of saying how this particular statement from 2050 changes and reinforces the conservation and that movement. So something has happened between 2020 and 2050 that makes the conservation movement very powerful and very, I'd say, widely respected and legally or in policy terms, a force, right? Like a strong actor in some way, right? Okay. Let's see. Are there any other aspects, pieces of the puzzle we want to add? It looks like somebody is bringing one up. Do you want some help? I can assist. Nope. It's making its way to the board. Yes. Like I said, games like this are way easier in person when you just take the card in your hand and you put it on the board and you read it out loud. And so designing for these kind of new mediums, different kinds of games is really been a struggle. So I'm learning a lot. And thank you.
Yeah, that was me moving the economic card.
Well done, sir. Well done. Yes. Okay. Olivia, do you want me to read it out loud, or do you want to read it out loud and kind of work through your thinking here? I'll read it out loud. So economic. So planetary systems data is used by all actor networks as the basis for sensitive economic analysis and regulation. And it supports numerous decision assistance applications that are deployed across governing institutions. I would say that's one of the most abstract statements I've ever read. It's not too word soupy. There are some hints there, but at the same time, what are the ideas? What does this evoke in you guys as a group?
Maybe I can say something about this.
Sure.
I feel that, to me, it just sounds that a bit difficult, in the sense that basically having planetary systems data would maybe also only be useful, or well, maybe it's still useful, but really useful if you really understand the entire system and all the factors that influence it, etc. So I sort of feel that basing certain decisions on that data can be useful, but not if it's done only on that. I feel like there's just so many, because also data can be not very objective, but with certain assumptions within it already. And I think that giving this objective facade can just legitimize decisions sometimes that may not be beneficial for everyone. And in that sense, I think that could be problematic and should be complemented with more people-based approaches and participatory approaches.
Awesome. Very good. Excellent. Anybody else like to comment on that, or shall I ask Sarah to imagine an action in this?
I think Olivier was trying to say something, but
Okay.
I think he was.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. We can
Okay,
hear you.
yeah, sorry, I don't know, somehow my space bar does not function when I want to activate the mic, so I have to do it by hand every time. Yeah, I just wanted to say, basically I picked this card also in relationship to the role I was playing, the EU Agency for the Environment, that has a vision of implementing like a full, basically a full market for ecosystem services, possibly functional. And yeah, I believe that such planetary data systems could contribute to basically provide the basic data to value some ecosystems, for instance, and yeah, provide the basic metrics on which to establish valuation and develop such markets at a global scale, at a planetary scale. So yeah, it's quite vague, abstract, as you said it, but I think that could be part of it. So
awesome. So there's two really, I think, interesting points of view that both of you guys have just outlined. Sarah outlined very well how, yeah, data is great, but it has the facade of objectivity when that's not the case. So that data needs to be challenged, questioned, and then also supplemented with maybe more participatory engagement. At the same time, Olivier says, yes, but this data allows us perhaps to begin doing things like valuing, placing value, numerical kind of quantitative values on these ecosystems, which then allows us to translate those maybe more readily into economic decisions or other types of policy decisions. And from an agency standpoint, and then also from a civil society organization standpoint, I think that's a very interesting approach to this card, right? And particularly because both of you, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say both of you have outlined what lies inside of this scenario, right? There is more participation that is slowly unfolded in terms of how it works and how society and individuals interact. And at the same time, these planetary system monitoring systems, that is exactly what their data is used for, right? It is to place values on ecosystems, to monitor their health and their wellness, and then also to then make those important economic decisions based on, well, what's happening in the Pacific Basin in terms of fisheries or algae blooms, what's happening in the forests of Brazil or sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's this monitoring that then says, okay, we can't continue this type of behavior. And then the data itself is not just the planetary systems data, it's also data that is citizen sourced from those regions, right? So the fishers in the Pacific Basin, the people who are walking in the forests or using, maybe the runoff, the clean water runoff from forests in sub-Saharan Africa or in Brazil, and saying, this is what we're seeing on a daily basis. And so there's this kind of interplay between those two aspects of just this one card. And like I'm giving away a little bit more of the scenario here than I intended, but that's because it's very clear at this point we are not going to make it through the entire scenario, and I wanted to kind of demonstrate like how would this eventually build right into a greater perspective. What I would ask is each of the things that you guys just said would be the basis for an action, right? So Olivier, you said very well, I'm an EU agency and here's how I would take an action. So then I would say, okay, you could move one of these cards in, and then we'd say, very simply, use data to evaluate ecosystems, ... You said much more eloquently, and I wouldn't even say that accurately represents everything that you said. And then at the same time, I would say to Sarah and Louise, same deal, right? Place an action, and let's say just in response to that economic thing, ecological, or at least economic, right? Data is not objective. Oops. Supplement. I am both a bad speller and a bad typer, but not at the same time all the time. Supplement with participatory or citizen-derived data. ... Okay, so then you've got a couple of different actions that you could take it from the perspective of your organization, or at least a statement about that. And then these small circles are supposed to be resources. This was an aspect that was in the original scenario exploration system. I didn't really detail out in this prototype how they would be used, but you could put 1, 2, or 3 resources on a specific action and just, yeah, kind of move it over there. Nope, you kind of, first I have to bring them all to the front again. Yeah, anyway. Anyway, that is more or less how gameplay would emerge, or sorry, would play out. Yeah. Do you guys want to keep playing or open a broader discussion or go get lunch? How do you guys? Oh, sorry, Olivier, were you just saying something? No, okay, because I saw in your chat that yes. Okay, that's from before. Very good, very good. Yes, Louisa, please.
Hey, sorry, I'm just turning on my camera so you can see me.
Hi.
Hey, sorry, I joined a bit late, so probably I missed this, and maybe you already talked about it, but I would be really interested to hear from your work with the project if you've done any policymaker engagement, and if you plan to do so, and if you have, or if you're thinking about it, any ideas or tips you have for engaging policymakers around scenarios.
I'm so glad you asked. We are approaching that really like right now. So there's one aspect of the Trigger project called the Perseus platform, and that's under development right now. And what that is going to do is bring in the data from the global stat project that's been shaped into analyzing actorness, and that's both EU and global institutions. What types of governing instruments are available, how have memberships with organizations shifted over time, like the aggregator, as it's called, with the global stat data. That's one very large database, and it's very interesting. At the same time, we have then these scenarios, and there is an interactive platform that's being developed that's not this, and the purpose of that is to engage more with citizens, to be something that it's a little more individualized, right? So people can play through at their own pace, and they kind of build a record of their own understanding of each scenario, and they give their feedback on what they think of different aspects involved in some of these scenarios, in an anonymized way, but at the same time, hopefully in a useful way. And then Perseus brings those together specifically for policymakers. So I am getting to your original question. The Perseus platform is supposed to be primarily used as a portal for policymakers to engage with trends in global governance, and specifically like long-term, in a way, an anticipatory policy approach. It's really a way for them to say, well, we have this policy issue, we need to address it. What's already being done? What has been hypothesized in terms of more speculative futures? What trends or factors are already feeding into this, so that they can kind of test that policy idea or that policy issue ahead of time. That platform is under development, and really there's still a year and a quarter left in the project, and really most of the focus now is turning towards that. How can we make that platform accessible to policymakers and useful? I think more importantly, useful. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I'd also say, like, that's not really what my work package is about, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with the people that are developing that platform if you want to ask them more questions, or even, you know, one thing I love about the anticipatory governance channel is that we've got some of the best researchers and theoreticians and like, you know, people that are active in these spaces already. So if you have the time and energy to engage them, maybe you can give them some helpful feedback. If your work is more with policymakers, or that's where you would like to be, that there can be a fruitful exchange of ideas and learnings there. So
yeah, great. Yep. Thanks so much.
Sure.
I think we still have like 7 minutes for the event, so maybe it's a good moment to really open up, and if anyone has questions about the presentation or the game or feedback, maybe now would be a good moment to still do that.
Yeah, I have a question on the way you go through all the scenarios. Basically, I guess that's well, quite time consuming probably, or you have to do it in several rows. And how in this case the discussion between the different scenarios or worlds is made? How is this integrated? Do each groups do a different one, and are the same people participating in all of them? And then what happens after, once they have gone through the different rounds?
Great question. So the original scenario exploration system was built so that every working group would have 2 scenarios that they played, right? So they choose a role, and they define it, they'd set a vision, and then they'd play through one scenario. And that scenario, kind of the storytelling of what's going on was a little bit faster. And so I think that that's good feedback to have. Like, this medium doesn't really work with this more play-by-play feedback. But what you do is you go through one scenario, you learn about it in a more not linear, but in a time-based manner, right? So you'd learn about the next 10 years, and then 10 years after that, and then 10 years after that. What evolved, what changed, and then how would that shift your thinking? Then at the end, you'd look at your vision, and you'd self-assess. Did I achieve what I thought I would achieve when I started playing the scenario? Yes or no? Great. Then you'd flip and you'd say, okay, maybe I'll reassess my vision. And now we're going to go into another scenario. And the same kind of gameplay would happen. One thing we didn't get to in this, but that was, again, very clear in that original version, was like, how does collaboration happen? right? So even in just this round one example here, I think there would be a really interesting kind of moment for collaboration here, right? So EU agencies tap different civil society organizations and say, how can we work together to make this data analysis most useful for the people who are living based on what is extracted from ecosystems, and for the ecosystems themselves, so that they remain healthy and vibrant and productive, just ecosystems in and of themselves. So that would be an interesting place for your two agencies or groups to work together. So the idea is always that in alternative futures that you experience at least two futures, if not all four, right? Because what really is important here is extracting the elements of all the futures that are both desirable, and then also those ones that are undesirable, and building an image of the future that is overall preferable. So there will be pieces of each of these futures that you say, no, I really like that. I like this part of Gaia, but I like this new United Nations. I like these cultural networks that span the globe. And for some people, I like the EU with its own defense, with its self-sufficiency, with its sovereignty in terms of resources and in terms of everything they can generate, including protection. There are elements of all the scenarios that together help a group come up with what is our preferred vision, so that we can articulate that and then engage the harder work of saying, like, now how do we get there? How do we achieve that? What are some elements from each of the scenarios that would be fighting against that? How can we monitor them? How can we, again, through policy or other actions, dissuade those parts of the future, those undesirable parts, from becoming our reality? Yeah. So that's really how a game system, or any game system that deals with multiple scenarios, is most useful for a group. It's not these scenarios themselves, it's what's learned from the scenarios in terms of the group that's using them, so that they can build their own image of a preferable future and then work towards that.
I still had one small question, because I think at some point you mentioned, I think it was in the beginning, with the different scenarios, and there was also the E, which was, I think you called it Sci-Fi Alley.
Yes.
And I'm just a bit curious about how that was used, or what came up there, and yeah, in the project.
Yeah, good question. In this project, to be absolutely honest, I don't remember what E's emerged specific to which factor, and so I can only speak abstractly about what its general utility is for, right? So yeah, Sci-Fi Alley, and there's is a place for those imaginaries that I would say are possible, but tend to be more on the extreme side, right? Like really heavily influenced maybe by certain, like, cultural trends, so Robot Armageddon, the Terminator movies, or Apocalypse with the comet coming down, or there was that movie 2012 where basically the earth just went environmentally chaotic, right? Those ideas are useful in challenging or questioning a factor, but they might not be useful overall, right? You don't want to necessarily incorporate them into a scenario narrative as is. What you want to say is, well, let's acknowledge that idea, that possibility, and question that possibility a little bit more. Like, what actually, if you're worried about a zombie apocalypse, what are you really worried about? Is it this existential threat? Is it more these non-thinking, all-consuming creatures that are just what is it about this particular image or element that and this factor that brings the thought together? So you want to acknowledge it, record it, and then explore it. I would say that's what E is really for. Good question, though. Yeah, yeah. One last thing is that space also, because it's so prevalent in media, in alternative futures that are already kind of circulating in the collective intelligence, those ideas come up a little more easily, right? Somebody says, oh, AI, and somebody immediately goes, Terminator or Blade Runner or that movie Her, I think it was Her. Like, okay, that's AI. That's what they're already thinking about in terms of what is what happens with AI that runs out of control. So they already have these ideas, but again, maybe not the most useful ideas, but you still want to acknowledge them and then make them useful, right? So explore them and find out what is it there that can be used to help us shape our understanding of this possibility space for a factor or for a whole scenario. Anybody else? I know that we're kind of running over a bit, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to play the rest of the game. To spoil it for Gaia, what happens is Earth monitoring systems, nation states lose a lot of power, private actors become very powerful, but private actors are all controlled by, or I would say limited by artificial intelligence systems that are drawing from planetary systems data and citizen-derived data, which is feeding up into these massive data oceans and letting these AIs, and there are multiple ones so that there's not just a singular voice, tell private actors how to do what they intend to do. So if there's a health actor network, it provides data at local, regional, and global levels to say, here's the issue, here are the resources that are available, here are the best practices, and here are some things that you're already doing that are actually detrimental. And so, yeah, it's a very, it's an interesting scenario, I think. It does recognize the non-human as a very critical part. So ecologies, general ecologies are much more valued here. But nation states themselves almost become like, what is the word? They're cut up and only the useful parts are kept, and they're integrated into these private networks. So if there's an interesting part of citizenship to a nation that's useful in planetary and societal health, then they'll keep that. Everything else kind of gets slowly, I would say, diminished or even erased. There are some interesting modes of resistance in this too, but yeah, I'll leave that up to you guys to explore as you choose.
Okay, thank you so much, Aaron, for giving us this overview of the scenario worlds that emerged from the Trigger project. Personally, I really enjoyed the webinar and as well the game. I found it very interesting. And you mentioned that it works better in person with the board, but I feel like MIRO still was really useful. I feel like it really worked also online. Yeah, and I don't know if you have any closing statements, but otherwise I would just like to thank you a lot for giving us this this presentation, and also thanks to everyone who came, of course.
Yeah, my closing statements would be the same. Thank you guys for being here and for listening and participating, and for the opportunity. I know you're going to record this and share it with the rest of the Slack channel. Again, I appreciate the anticipatory governance community, and so I'm happy to be able to contribute something in whatever shape that is. And also, it's been an honor to be a part of the Trigger project. I really think that the work there is all done under the best of intentions and with the aspirational, sometimes ambitious goals, but at the same time, they're working to make policy a little more anticipatory and forward thinking, And right now, I think the EU is the best place in the world to be doing, well, not to be doing that. Everybody should be doing that, but they're really taking it on board. And so I think it's again, it's an honor to be a part of this project and being able to present it to this group. I see this group as, you know, the next generation of policymakers. Some of you maybe already are, and kind of taking futures into the action arena. So thanks.
Okay, thank you so much as well for all these words. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, then everyone have a very good day, and hopefully see you around again at some point.
I look forward to it. Bye. Thanks all for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.